Hello, you're listening to Send in the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. I'm Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast, brought to you by Twinkl SEND. As a former teacher in Senko myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dogs, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I am so excited to be joined by the wonderful Hayley Newman. Famous for wearing her heart on her sleeve, Hayley writes the award-winning blog Down's Side Up about life with her daughter Natty, who has Down syndrome. She has campaigned tirelessly for inclusion, equitable education and healthcare over the years, and trains medics and teachers to this aim. Hayley, along with daughter Mia, have published a book for children called I Love You, Natty, as well as contributing to many other books and publications such as the Huffington Post, Special Needs Jungle, The Telegraph and Nursing Times. She delivered a TEDx talk dispelling the myths around the condition and appeared in Sally Phillips's BBC documentary A World Without Downs. Hayley is often called upon to give comment in the media, and she and her model daughter Natty have popped up on The Lorraine Show, Channel 4 News, Loose Women and more. And now this podcast, Hayley. I'm not sure I can compete with those.
So we've saved the best till last, Georgina.
Oh, absolutely. Don't tell Loose Women. So, Hayley, I'm so excited to chat to you. I feel like we've sort of known each other a little while through like blogging and through social media and emails, but I'm really loving this opportunity to actually meet you. So how are you?
I am fine this morning. Thank you so much for having me on. And I think if you're being totally honest, it was your wonderful book that brought us together.
Yes, so you kindly endorsed it for me,
and
which was lovely.
You know, your wonderful book is one of the things that helped us keep going through the lockdowns and the homeschooling. So thank you. Yes, yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. So how's your week been? Are you having a nice week?
We are having a lovely week. We're enjoying some crisp sunny weather down here in Cornwall. Yeah. And Grandma has come to stay, and we haven't seen Grandma since about Easter. So
wonderful.
That's lovely. My parents have been shielding as we've been sort of extra cautious with Natty as well. So we're having a really good week, and this is one of the highlights.
Yay! Oh, it's so lovely getting people back in your house again, isn't it? And having
it certainly is.
Just somebody around to just make a cup of tea with and just chat and just I think we took all of that for granted, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Okay. So I was going to start by asking you to tell our listeners more about Down syndrome and what it actually is, which I think is important. So we'll cover that in a minute. But first, could you just tell me more about your wonderful daughter, Natty? I think she's the first UK model with a disability as well, which is very impressive.
Yeah, she has done a bit of groundbreaking work in her time. But Natty's 15, and she was born at home 15 years ago, and I had been given 1 in 279 risk was the word used at the time, very negative word, of having a baby with Down syndrome. And I had completely discarded that as a possibility. I had taken all the pregnancy vitamins. I had been to baby yoga. I had read every manual on the market. I was fit and healthy. That just simply wasn't going to happen to me.
It's the naivety, isn't it? I think we all think that as when you're
ignorant,
pregnant.
Arrogant, whatever you want to call it.
Oh no!
I just didn't think that was going to happen to me, and I refused invasive testing. My mind's gone blank.
No, I know you mean
the amnio. I refused the amnio because I had actually had 5 miscarriages, Georgina, and I didn't want to. Again, something we say, just an off-the-cuff a comment that people use. I didn't want to risk a healthy baby. But what if she wasn't healthy? Was her life worth a tiny bit less? And the other thing we say is, I don't care what the sex of the baby is as long as it's healthy. Again, what if not? So we're automatically sort of making a baby with any kind of genetic
that's really
condition.
Made me think, Hayley, because I've said that, and I've been to the mums groups, the prenatal groups before my kids were born, and it's just an off the cuff thing you say, and you feel like you're being a good person by saying the bit about I don't care if it's a boy or a girl. You think, I'm being good here because I'm saying I don't care if it's a boy or a girl as long as it's a healthy baby. But yeah, of course you're going to love the baby regardless.
Yes. So absolutely, as long as it's a baby, it's a baby.
Yeah, absolutely.
I suppose is what we need to be saying. And you're right. We go to these sort of mum groups, pregnancy groups, prospective parents, just pass that phrase one to the other, don't we? Just hand it on. So yes, Natty was born at home. She was blue. Floppy, pretty unresponsive, and the midwife present did panic a little bit, but none of us really knew what it was. And actually, the underlying root of that was that she had 2 holes in her heart when she was born. I mean, we were whisked into hospital, and but we didn't know that for days, and we were whisked into hospital, and the Down syndrome was identified about 5 hours later. And I have to admit, it was a huge shock.
Yeah.
Because I knew nothing about the condition, which is due to an extra chromosome. So Natty has extra chromosome 21. So another term for Down syndrome is trisomy 21. And that is in every cell of her body, and it affects different people in different ways. But it generally results in some level of learning disability.
Yeah.
Natty's a little bit smaller, needs support, learning everyday things like sort of learning to cross the road or sort of get dressed, self-help skills and all of that. But it can have sort of eyesight or hearing impacts. But as I say, everybody's an individual, everybody's different. And I thought Natty would be a sort of shy and retiring, sitting in a corner. I had this image of her tongue poking out with a sort of a fairly standard NHS haircut and old-fashioned glasses and be quite frumpily dressed. And of course not. She's my daughter. And she dresses the way that we've encouraged her to dress. Yeah. And she's got a very distinctive style. And she's bright, beautiful, funny. And she's taught us so much. And she's made me a better person, Georgina.
Oh, wow. She sounds wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And I loved when I listened, I'm digressing a little bit, but when I watched your TEDx talk, which if anybody hasn't watched yet, if you go onto YouTube, or I think if you go onto Hayley's website, there's a link, or if you Google it, she talks about her experiences and the responses of the doctors and the responses of the midwife, etc. But the one thing that stuck with me was the bit about Mia, her elder sister, and just the way that you said about her sort of teaching you about it, the fact that children don't see the disability, they don't see any difference, and she sort of taught you.
Yes. I mean, absolutely, because Mia was 2 when Natty was born, and she'd never heard the phrase Down syndrome. No. So let alone having any sort of stigma attached to it, didn't mean anything to her. She just wanted to know why her baby sister wasn't coming home from hospital. She was in the neonatal unit for 3 weeks, and all her friends' baby siblings came straight home. So that's all she wanted to know. And both girls really just live in the moment. They just got on with it, didn't they? Yeah. And, did teach us. And I think something that happens when you have a baby that has any kind of genetic condition or additional needs or whatever you want to call it, you are guilty of, instead of just loving that baby that's in front of you for exactly who they are, you are guilty of trying to map out their entire lives. I immediately wanted to know within an hour whether she would get married or whether Natty would get a job or whether she would go to mainstream school. Instead of just thinking, I wonder how she's going to do feeding, and I wonder how she's going to sleep, and all of these
and just
other
thinking
things.
In the moment, you're sort of planning too far ahead. And that's probably, like you say about your eldest daughter, that's probably, kids just live in the here and now, don't they? Especially younger children. So she'll have just seen her right now as she is.
And I have huge regrets over that. I wish I could go back and just see my amazing baby for exactly who she was at that time, instead of seeing just this big label, Down syndrome, and being frightened by it, and actually wondering if I was good enough to be her mum. And I can't turn back the clock, but I think that is the driving force behind having started the blog.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. So before having Natty, did you know very much about Down syndrome at all then? I know you said you had sort of like a preconceived idea, but...
Not at all, not at all. And I used to be a teacher, and in my capacity as a teacher, I hadn't ever come across any pupils with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
I think I would have perhaps seen, I'm a little bit older than you. So when I went to school, people with any kind of learning disability or additional needs would have been completely segregated into another school setting, or even not at school. And so all my experience would have been seeing people in the street, or, seeing people from afar, perhaps with their families or in group situations. And I think that at best, I would have probably had some sort of patronising, jovial approach. I might have even said, "Oh, they're musical and loving, aren't they?" Or something.
Yeah, one of the throwaway comments that people say.
Hideous, out of date comment. Wrong.
Yeah.
So no, I had very, very little experience, and I think that is what drove the shock and the fear behind the early days when Natty was born. And of course, the language that comes from the medical professionals, words shape our thinking.
Yeah.
And so as I told you earlier, I was given this risk of having a baby, risk of fire, risk of flooding, risk of death, risk of bad things.
Yeah.
So, and the fact we're screening and scanning for this extra chromosome, it has to be a bad thing, doesn't it? That's how we're conditioned to think.
That's a really good point. It's the language, isn't it? It's the way it's been approached that changes the way we think about it.
And our community midwife wept when she heard the news and said, this really shouldn't happen to such a lovely family. And so that set the tone. Yeah. That set the tone.
Oh, especially when you're so vulnerable and you just had a baby as well.
Yes.
To hear that, gosh. So in terms of misconceptions about Down syndrome, what you've touched on a couple of them, but what would you say the common misconceptions are?
Gosh, there are so many, and some of them aren't even appropriate to say here.
No.
The musical and loving thing, for sure. Always happy. They're always happy, aren't they? No. Natty is a fully rounded person like you or I. She has up days, down days. She can get cross. If she doesn't like you, she'll tell you. She has, she'll feel embarrassed, happy, sad, worried, all the emotions.
Yeah.
They're stubborn, aren't they? No, they just, perhaps Natty doesn't like being told what to do, and she'll tell you if she doesn't like being told what to do. Another common misconception is that, there's sort of life expectancy of 40 or 50. Right. I do remember somebody telling me that when literally Natty was a babe in arms in a papoose, and saying, "Oh, one of them lived to 40 down my road. That's really old for them, So, with the right support, individuals with Down syndrome can live into their 60s and even 70s these days. Yeah. So in the right sort of, with the medical interventions and so on and so forth. I've heard, horrendous things. They're very highly sexed, aren't they? You need to give them things to calm down their sex drive.
They're all quite offensive, really, aren't they?
Very offensive. People with Down syndrome can get married, hold down jobs, have their own homes with support, or not.
Yeah.
And I think there is also this thing where, oh, look, Natty's a model. Oh, look, I know this person with a job, or that person's on TV. Actually, if you don't do any of those things, you're still a success, and you're still a worthy person, and you still play an amazing role in your family. So,
no, that's a very good point. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we'd like to think that perceptions around Down syndrome and disabilities have come a long way in the last 10 to 20 years. What do you think has changed since you had Natty? Would you say things have improved, and what needs to change more?
I think things have changed. I think there is, when I started writing Downside Up over a decade ago, it was the only blog in this country that I knew about Down syndrome. There was one in America, Noah's Dad, and now there are many. And, in terms of social media, there's a very positive presence, and there are lots and lots of incredible charitable groups and books and lovely support networks out there online. And so I think that there is a much more positive, it's much more obvious. You can find information that's current and up to date rather than having to sort of go to an old handbook, which I was given when Natty was born.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, there were beautiful, positive leaflets and wonderful, wonderful things. Positive about Downs, making chromosomes count, and the usual charities like the Down syndrome charity. There's a lot of that.
Yeah.
So I think new parents perhaps wouldn't be as shocked and as in the dark as I was. But that said, there's a flip side in that non-invasive testing has come a long way.
Right.
And we are, as a society, testing and screening far more prospective parents. We are identifying Down syndrome antenatally far more accurately.
Yeah.
And the termination rate of babies with Down syndrome is increasing all the time. So it stands currently at about 92% of all antenatally identified pregnancies with Down syndrome. So, and in other countries such as Holland, some Scandinavian countries, there hasn't been a baby born with Down syndrome for about 5 years. It's complete eradication. So,
oh gosh, that's made me feel quite upset. Yeah. I'm just thinking from the point of view of the Down syndrome community, hearing that sort of news, knowing that's happening, it must be really upsetting.
It is devastating, and I believe in choice, and this is a very deep topic and perhaps not one for Twinkl, but choice. I think if prospective parents are given unbiased, up to date information to make these agonising decisions, then I think we'd probably see around a 50% termination rate. But the fact that it's so high, and in other countries 100%, and yes, it is very sad. What are we missing out on?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are we missing out on in our sort of delicate ecosystem of humanity? And what does that say to our children, who then are finding that they have fewer and fewer peers?
Oh gosh, yeah,
and fewer support groups. So yes, it's ethically, that's a very big question. So anyone interested in this particular topic, I would urge to watch Sally Phillips' documentary A World Without Downs, which poses exactly that question. What are we facing, a world without Down syndrome, and what would that look like, and what does that mean?
Yeah, and that documentary, I would second it. It's absolutely brilliant. I remember when it was a while ago. When was it? 2000? I
think it's about 5 years ago.
I was going to say it's a little while ago. I remember my mum calling me and saying, "You need to watch this." I think I was Zenko at the time, or my mum rang me anyway and was like, "You need to watch this documentary." And I think we both cried watching it, and it was just really thought provoking and really made you think, didn't it? And
yes, it raises some very valuable questions, and not least that. A lot of the screening test manufacturers are making a lot of money as well. So it's sort of making money out of fear, perhaps. But yes, it's a minefield, that topic.
Yeah. So your blog, if we talk about that, because then you have an absolutely fantastic and very successful blog. You're like one of the I like to think of you as like one of the founding bloggers. You're like one of the big bloggers. And I follow your blog. I love it. And you say in your own words, it sort of challenges fear and stigma and celebrates the narratives of those with Down syndrome. Do you want to tell us about it? I know it's obvious. I think it's obvious from your answers why you've started it, but do you want to tell us about it, how it's evolved, where people can find it, that sort of thing?
Yes. Well, it's very kind of you to say that you think of me as one of the big bloggers. I always call myself an accidental blogger. So I don't feel like one of the big girls and boys that really know what they're doing. So, a lot of blogs are very slick and professional, and mine is very homemade looking, and it's honest and it's open, and it was accidental. It just started with me sort of crying into my keyboard, and I thought that I'd started it at the time to buy new parents time with their new baby, that I would cut through this fear and help them bond quicker. But actually it was cathartic for me.
Yes.
And this online community that I suddenly found myself part of, which was my readership and other bloggers, became a very tight-knit family, and the support has very, very much been two-way over the years.
Oh, I love that.
But it really genuinely has. So when Natty has been in hospital for whatever, tonsils, heart surgery, or when my marriage broke down very suddenly, the support has come back to me through that blog network. So
that's really nice that you've written something for somebody else, and then it's benefited you in that way.
And it started off just talking about when Natty was born and Down syndrome, and then I started putting resources there. But it became it was organic. It went where it needed to go, and so people would. If something controversial happened, somebody said something negative, a high-profile person said something negative about Down syndrome, people would say to me, come on, Hayley, you've got to write about this. So I would. And then the screening thing, so I would write about that. Or something happens, but sometimes I just write about, there's a recipe on there for homemade baked beans to help your child go to the toilet when they're constipated.
But that's the sort of thing people are Googling, like parents will be Googling at night time, because you fret, don't you, as a parent, and you're thinking, if things like that, you might Google it.
Possibly. So what can I say? It's broad based, and I don't blog as much as I used to, because I think of it as a hub. And like the centre of a bicycle wheel, and the spokes came off. And so, as I'm sitting here talking to you now because of the blog, but I'm not writing on the blog today, I'm talking to you. So it became the sort of centre of lots and lots of other lovely things.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love it. So how can people find your blog if they're thinking, I'm going to go and check that blog out?
Yeah, so the blog is downsideup.com. So it's got 2 S's in the middle. Yes. If you type it in without 2 S's, you come to some slightly strange religious film website. So it's downsideup.com. And it's Downside Up on all the socials. I'm really simple. I keep it really simple.
Yours that you can find you everywhere, because I think when I did mine, I had to miss a letter out on Twitter, and that's caused me no end of problems because they don't match.
Keep it simple.
Yeah, and your book, so you and your eldest daughter Mia, Natty's older sister, you published a children's book called I Love You, Natty, which is very, very sweet and lovely. Yeah. Can you tell us more about that?
Bless you, yes. Well, again, when Natty was born, I Googled and searched and went to the well-known online book purchasing website and looked for a book that I could read with Mia at bedtime to explain why Mummy and Daddy were a bit worried, and why baby Natty hadn't come home from hospital yet, and why as a family we would make a few reasonable adjustments, but life would carry on as it had done before. And there were lots of books, and some of them were a bit outdated and from the 70s or 80s, and some were American, written in American, and some were a bit dry, and so on and so forth. So a few years later, I found a beautiful note from Mia to her sister with a drawing of us as a family. Oh. And it was a little love note saying, Natty, it's in the book, and Natty, I love you so much in my world. You're so important to me, and if you weren't in this world, my life wouldn't be the same, and that wouldn't be fun. I think Mia was about 7 when she wrote that, and I thought, that's it. That is the basis for the book that we were looking for.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful.
Yes, with a fantastic friend who works in publishing, and she put together the look of it with family photos and family drawings, and it's really colourful and it's bright, and it does touch on how Natty learnt Makaton, and we've had speech therapy for her, and it touches on all the practical side of things, heart surgery and so on, but in a very accessible way for children.
Oh, it's lovely. You keep making me tear up. I don't know what it is about you, or if it's just me being emotional. I don't know what it is, but I watched your TEDx talk and I was crying. And then even you just telling me that about that note, I had a tear.
Sorry, I do have a reputation for some people say I need to be sponsored by Kleenex, because I do have a reputation for making people cry. Sorry.
You do? No, it's okay. I think it's me as well. So the other part which I wanted to talk about was education-wise. So a lot of our listeners are obviously teachers, teaching assistants, Senkos, head teachers, etc. And I know they'll be keen to learn more about how to ensure successful inclusion and education of children with Down syndrome. I presume that's probably why they'll listen to this episode. And whilst they may have learned about Down syndrome, I don't think they may not have heard the valuable sort of parents' perspective that you can give. And you sort of give both sides, because I know you've been a teacher and a teaching assistant yourself. So if we could start sort of personal experience, your daughter Natty, she started in a mainstream reception class. That's right, isn't it?
She did. Yeah. And then there's a little bit of backstory to that. Okay. I think let's wheel back even more, because we were lucky enough to be able to access Portage.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think that exists nationwide, and I know resources are stretched. But Portage was our first experience of Natty being filtered into the education system. Yeah. And that was fantastic. It was a lovely lady who came to the house once a fortnight. Mm-hmm. And we were able to access a library of very specialised toys, quite heavy duty, sort of colourful toys. And she put together a little programme of activities to help Natty make choices, to reach and grab, look at things that caught her attention. And more importantly than that, it was someone that came to the house, had a cup of tea with me and told me I was doing okay.
Yeah, which you probably needed it just as much as Natty.
And also she, again, sort of it was a family wide support, in that she devised little activities that would include Mia as well.
Oh, lovely.
So that was wonderful.
So what age was that then? What age?
So I think Natty was about 2 when that started.
Oh wow, that's really good that you got support from so early on.
18 months even.
Brilliant.
18 months even. So that was fantastic. And the Portage worker was able to help me identify a suitable preschool for Natty to go to. And that was a mainstream village setting. It was a very small preschool. And they were absolutely fantastic.
Brilliant.
They were, in fact, I think that was the best part of Natty's education.
Wow.
Bar none.
Gosh.
Until this date. It was amazing. If Natty couldn't access something, nobody did it. Natty was so tiny at the time, we couldn't quite find a little chair. We did eventually source a chair from Community Playthings.
Yeah. A
tiny, weeny little wooden chair, very sturdy, with sides on it, so she couldn't fall off or fall out.
Oh.
Which was gorgeous. But until that point, she couldn't sit at one of the little chairs for snack time. So everybody had their snacks on the carpet.
Oh, I love that. That is wonderful.
It was wonderful.
That's how it should be.
Yes, it was absolutely wonderful. And Natty had an amazing key worker there called Helen, who is still part of our lives and now is one of Natty's PAs. She's like an auntie. And Helen, really we worked together, and she was as determined as I was that Natty would start school in pants and not in nappies. And she would spend hours with Natty on the potty doing Jolly Phonics flashcards, and Natty knew all of her phonics before she started school.
Wow.
In part due to this amazing setting and this incredible woman.
That's wonderful. I understand why you wanted to talk about before school first.
Yes.
That's
and
brilliant.
That was really, really, really fantastic. And they helped to put the transition package together for school. Mm-hmm. And I think we took, what seemed like forever, at least 6 months transitioning into school, which was attached within the same village setting as the preschool. So they, Natty would go in for half days and play in the sandpit. And of course her sister was at that school anyway. So,
which helps.
We'd meet the teachers at the gate anyway. So that worked brilliantly. Mm-hmm. It was a very natural move for Natty, and she went into that reception class with many, many peers. So that worked beautifully. And a reception teacher was amazing. It was a young man. He, again, fully inclusive. He built himself a little stage up to the whiteboard with a little step.
He built it.
He built it himself of wood and carpeted it so that Natty could reach the whiteboard.
Yeah.
Interactive whiteboard. So that initial first few years went beautifully.
Yeah, that sounds good. So if a teacher's listening now, say a reception teacher, and they're thinking, and they know of a child with Down syndrome who's going to be coming into their school, what would your advice to them be? So make sure that there's a longer transition period, presumably, starting as early as you can.
Yes. And we created a transition book. So we had photographs of all the key staff. We took photographs of the classroom, the playground, the toilets, the coat hooks. And then during the summer holidays, we were able to go through that book many, many times and talk about the different areas of school, what things were called, the names of the key people.
Yeah. No, that's a really good idea.
So really do it in a visual way. Key things to put into place, I think, as well, some kind of visual, some software where you can share photographs between home and school.
Yeah.
I know there's software available. We couldn't find that at the time, so we had a sort of a visual book, and I bought, and I'm not sure you can still buy them actually, but it was a little photo book that you could slot photographs into, but you could also record sound over each page, and we would record Natty saying the name of her teacher or saying the name of her best friend in this little book. I think Tommy made them.
Oh, that sounds really. Have you still got the book? Because I bet that's adorable to look back at.
Of course, yes. A little voice with you.
Oh, yeah.
So keep it very visual. Take a bit longer. And the other thing I would advise is to go on a specialist course, if you can, run by the Down Syndrome Association, and get hold of their specialist books that they have for. They have books for transition and books for educating a child in mainstream and so on and so forth. So they have lots of really valuable resources on their site.
Brilliant. So I was going to ask, because I know some parents choose to go down the special school route and then others go for mainstream when they start reception. How did you make that decision, and how would you advise? I know it's very personal to the individual child, but what advice would you give people when making that decision? Because it must be a difficult one.
This is actually more of a can of worms than you would realise.
Okay. It's very personal.
Yeah. B, every child is different. Mm-hmm. And there is, I think, a feeling that a lot of parents have fought very hard for our children to have access to mainstream school over the years.
Yes.
And I think there's an unspoken, perhaps, feeling that we're letting the side down if we put our children in specialist setting. And also, you have to admit to yourself, I'm choosing my words carefully here, but you have to accept that your child is going to go to a specialist setting, and that might be something that it takes a while to come to terms with.
Yeah.
And for some parents, there's a big badge that you can wave to say my child's in mainstream. Yeah. And for some children, that's perfect and that is right. But for Natty, we had to accept that wasn't right anymore. And that took a little bit of a shift in our thinking.
Yeah.
And we had to look at things from Natty's perspective, not ours.
Yes, no, I can see that.
I'm choosing my words carefully because I really don't want to offend anybody, because it's such a personal decision.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to say to anyone whose child is in mainstream right the way through to 16 or 18 or whatever that they had made the wrong decision, because that might be right for their young person. But for Natty, it went really well for a couple of years, 2 or 3 or so years. And then the gaps began to widen between her and her peers. And what began to happen is that Natty became the class mascot.
Right.
She was loved, she was adored, but she was a source of fun for others, and they treated her like a baby, and they picked her up and cuddled her, and she didn't get invited to birthday parties, and she wasn't a genuine equal friend.
Yes. No, I was going to say, I think equal friend is the term, isn't it? Yeah.
And that began to hurt me. And I think Natty began to realise that was happening herself. I don't think she ever articulated it, but I think she could feel that. Mm-hmm. And then she began to become educated in the corridor with a TA.
Right.
And things weren't as well differentiated as I would have liked to see them. And she was being segregated.
Yeah.
It wasn't inclusion. She was under the same roof, but she was being segregated from her peers.
When you look at the difference from that to the preschool setting, you know, the more sitting on the rug because she couldn't sit at the table, it's completely different, isn't it? That's not inclusion.
And my thinking changed because when she was tiny, I remember saying, you know, when I did my Senko talks, my training, you know, inclusion's a two-way street and the other kids are learning as much from Natty as she's learning from them. But actually that stopped.
Yeah.
And they were learning lots from having her in the class, but it wasn't really working the other way. And then there were two incidents, which if we've got time,
we've got time, absolutely.
There were two very key moments for me. And one was when her class, I think this might have been about year 4 or 5, and they went swimming, you know, standard swimming. Off they got in the minibus and off they went to the local pool. And Natty's a great swimmer. Mm-hmm. And she came home and I said, oh, this is great. How did it go? And what group are you in? And turned out there were 3 groups. And she said, I'm in group 2. And I thought, wow, I was so proud of her. So proud of you. I gave her an enormous hug. Natty, you're in group 2. That's amazing. And then, you know, that was obviously the middle group.
Yeah.
There was a group of children that couldn't swim and a group of, you know, Olympic swimmers, and she was in the middle group. And then almost as instantly as I felt really proud, I felt really sad.
Why?
And this is going to make me tear up because I realised this was the first time in her educational career that she had ever not been at the bottom of the pile for anything at all.
Gosh.
Unless it was empathy or being in tune with your classmates' emotions or making everyone giggle with a well-timed fart. It was the first time that she had not been at the bottom.
Yeah.
And imagine that. Imagine what that does for your self-esteem when you're always the one that needs extra help and you've got a TA velcroed to your side and everyone's always making special allowances for you. And actually you're a little bit of you're holding everyone back. It must be how it feels to you. You haven't got any proper friends. And the other one was the other incident, which happened around about the same time, came at the end of term, and it was a parents' evening. And I went into the classroom and I sat down in a little mini chair at the table and the teacher was opposite me, and he was a lovely, lovely teacher. And there was a piece of paper on the table. And, you know, that was his report, his notes. And I could see, reading backwards, I could see upside down in quite large font across the top of the first section, below expectations. And I must have physically sort of stiffened, and I said to him, I can see that says below expectations on that form. He said, oh, don't worry about that. That's sort of a national standards we have to adhere to, a sort of national criteria. Don't worry about that. Natty's doing really well. And how can I not worry about that?
It's written right in front of you. Yeah.
All I could think of was, you know, this young lady has survived heart surgery. She's learnt to walk and chatter. She's learnt to love reading books. She swims like a fish. She's been scuba diving. She can make an entire room full of people erupt with laughter, or a bit of twerking or whatever. She's been on mainstream TV. She dances beautifully. She has exceeded all of our expectations.
Absolutely.
And somebody somewhere with a set of criteria has deemed her as being below expectations. And at that moment, I realised that setting was not the right setting for my child.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you say, how can anybody say that she hasn't exceeded expectations? How can they say that I can completely understand why that made your decision. So then so she's now in a specialist setting, is that correct?
She's now in a specialist setting. So exactly what we need to do is measure young people against themselves, not against, one another. So at that point, we made the decision. Now, I was a trustee of several special schools that are in a MAT at that time. And I knew that one of the schools was perfect for Natty. So it's a specialist school for young people with communication needs. And so, it was just the perfect fit for Natty. And they had 1 or 2 spaces in their year 6. They had a year 5 and 6 provision for one class. And there were a couple of spaces there. And we sort of made the case for that, and we got Barney Anglis down to Cornwall. I don't know if you know Barney, and he came down to a meeting. So he's for those of you that don't know, he's a very high-profile SEN consultant.
Amazing.
And we got him down. He made the case extremely forcefully, and we got the place for Natty.
Brilliant. And
which happened that we got that place 2 weeks before the term started, the new school year started. Wow. There was no transition. There was literally no transition whatsoever for Natty. She left one school. We had summer holiday. We got the place. I rushed out and bought some uniform, and she started. It wasn't ideal at all.
No.
It wasn't ideal at all. And so she didn't really get a chance to say goodbye, and she still talks about loving her old school, and that wasn't done brilliantly.
No, but it was the way you had to do it to get it. So
it was the way we had to do it to get that place. And immediately, from a selfish perspective, I went from constantly having to make suggestions at school, constantly making resources, constantly feeling I needed to supplement what was going at school at home in the evenings and at weekends, to everything being done at school. Brilliant. They just got it. They knew what they were doing. They had worked with so many people with Down syndrome before. It wasn't what they were. She wasn't the first one to ever go through the doors. I wasn't constantly signposting resources and groups and constantly having sleepless nights over the fact that Natty wasn't quite getting what she needed. And crucially, she was fully included in every aspect of school life from day one.
Wonderful.
Instead of being, as I mentioned earlier, segregated. So everybody has access to everything, and nobody has a TA. Nobody has that one-to-one. Everybody has all the right support, but it's in a hands-off way. And, from day one, Natty was encouraged to walk around the school independently, to find her way about, to take paperwork to the secretary, whatever. Independence was encouraged. And so that was a huge relief for me, and her confidence and self-esteem grew. And I couldn't, I literally wept when she got that school place. It hasn't always been perfect. My marriage broke down quite quickly and quite rapidly, in quite difficult circumstances just after Natty started there. And I was really relieved that she was in that place. We'd got her to the right school before it happened. And school were very, very supportive of Mia and I. And Natty was getting some counselling there, some trauma-informed support. And, I was confiding in her teacher, and we were getting the support that we needed.
So in terms of the school, would you say she sort of thrived when she started then, obviously after the bumpy bit at the beginning?
She did thrive, and she's had opportunities that I believe she would not have had in mainstream school. So, for example, when there's a netball team, everybody has a chance to be on the netball team, and there are netball posts at full height, mid height, and on the ground.
Brilliant.
So that depending on your needs. So in a mainstream school, there's absolutely no way Natty would have ever had a chance to be in the netball team. Natty is on the school council. She's been interviewing prospective head teachers.
Oh, wow, brilliant.
Recently. All those opportunities are open to everybody.
Yeah, that's the way it should be. That's good.
Yes. And in a mainstream school, I think perhaps at best, Natty might have been a token.
Yeah, I see what you mean. There's the danger, isn't there, that it can be,
yes. So
way.
Yes, she's thrived. And then, of course, the same for everybody. But then, of course, the COVID pandemic came and lockdown came and homeschooling came. And that I think has been particularly difficult for our children with SEN.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard a lot of children with special educational needs and disabilities. The lockdown has particularly affected them probably the most.
Yes, it's been very difficult to explain why we had to do things the way we did. Natty's a social animal, and that was very difficult to not see her friends, not be with her friends.
Yeah.
Natty particularly dislikes Zooms. And so any kind of education online or any kind of even talking to grandma or doing her dance classes online, she didn't want to do that.
Oh gosh,
which is understandable. And then homeschooling was tricky, which is where your book came in, which is great. And Twinkl, oh my gosh, did we use Twinkl? Boy, did we use Twinkl. And then when we were able to access some schooling because of her EHCP, and I chose to do that a couple of days a week. And she went into school, and it was beautifully done, very safely done, very small bubbles of 3 children. But she wasn't in with her best friends because some of her best friends perhaps weren't going back into school. Yeah. And it was just a question of who was going in on which days.
Yes, because it wasn't always certain who was going to be in school.
Well, exactly, and who had COVID and who didn't. Yeah. So she was thrown into a bubble with people that so that was difficult to explain. And yes, when we opened up again and school was back to normal, she wasn't in with her best friend. So that was really tricky. It's like, us being allowed to go out for meals again, and it's not with your family or best friends, you're just thrown together with some random acquaintance.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it.
Yeah. So that was tricky, but we are thriving again now. And this academic year, she's got a young male teacher, which she loves. She gets on well with him, and he's vibrant and he's upbeat and he's full of energy. So we've got, she's back into her stride again, and she's just started doing 1 night a week boarding.
Oh, wow.
So we're working towards her independence. Yeah. So that's fantastic.
And then, so if we're going through the journey of schools, what my last question would be about transition to post-16. I know it's not something you'll have done yet, but for teachers or for parents who are thinking about this transition, it's a big area that's not covered often. What are the options for you?
Yes. Well, certainly here in Cornwall, and I think perhaps I speak for families all over the country, our options are limited. Mm-hmm. If you don't have SEN, you probably got a choice of 2, 3, 4, sixth form provisional or a college or an apprenticeship, or you've got so many choices open to you. And really, my options, I think, are doing it myself or one college here locally, which does a sort of a life skills course. And I'm not sure whether that's right for Natty, but yes, we are looking ahead at that. I think there's an open evening or open day coming up in the next month or so. It's amazing how it whizzes round. I am nervous. I am anxious. But I think what I've told myself is that we take 1 year at a time, and the journey isn't necessarily linear, and it doesn't have to end at 18 as it would for Mia. So, in fact, I was chatting to Natty's head teacher about this the other day. I would love Natty to do maybe a couple of GCSEs or some similar qualification, but that doesn't have to be at 16.
No,
it could be at 18, or it could be further beyond that. So it could be that she does a couple of years of life skills at college, and then we look at something else after that. So I think, or we supplement it ourselves at home. So I think it's about looking at it from different angles and different perspectives, and actually thinking of her education as a bit like a jigsaw and piecing bits together from here and there. And maybe, looking at getting a job or some voluntary service or something like that. And I would love ultimately perhaps Natty to go to a specialist setting like, Fox's Academy, but I think we're looking out of county for that.
Yeah.
So
that's another difficult decision in the future.
It's difficult. And simultaneously, I'm looking at when the medical provision will then become adult services and not the paediatric services that we've known throughout Natty's life. So every time we go in to hospital for any routine procedure, we see the same team that have known her since birth. And suddenly that's going to change. That's going to stop soon as well, which worries me. So I think I speak for all parents on this. I don't often try to speak for all, but this is where we feel, I have to live for a very long time because I have to be Natty's advocate for life.
Yeah.
I have to do it for her. And I have to make sure that all the reasonable adjustments are being made.
Yeah.
And I have to fight her corner for her all the time. So it does worry me.
Yeah,
it does worry me. And yes, we have to start looking.
I suppose if we link back right to the beginning when we were talking about when you were sort of mapping out her whole life when she was like in her first weeks of life, it's a similar sort of thing now, isn't it? Yes, you've got to plan ahead for it, but it's like you say, you've still got to take each year as it comes and be living it. Yes, you've got to plan for it, but you're still just enjoying her as she is.
We're sort of contradicting ourselves, aren't we, constantly? It's sort of, yes, you've got to write a will and you've got to plan the provision for adulthood, but you've also got to enjoy. And one piece of advice I would give to parents and staff alike, teaching staff alike, is that I think when Natty was tiny, I was guilty of turning her into a bit of a project.
Yeah.
And if I throw enough flashcards at this baby, she'll be, off the scale. She'll be amazing. She's going to do all these GCSEs. And she'll be, actually, what I needed to do was take her out and get her muddy. And this is where your book is so wonderful because it's about play.
There's a lot of mud in my book.
This is be mud and just go, or just, have a tickle fight. Or let's just snuggle up on the sofa and watch a Disney film. And that is important too.
Yeah.
And yes, just to enjoy your child and not turn them into a project.
Yeah.
And, for members of teaching staff, don't always look at your ticky boxes and your criteria. And, for some children, success is that they've made a friendship, a genuine friendship in school. And what we want for our children is that they will grow up as independent as possible. Mm-hmm. I don't care if Natty ever learns her times tables.
Yes.
It really doesn't matter a jot to me. She loves reading. Mm-hmm. Her writing is pretty strong, but that isn't, will she learn to live as independently as possible with support? Will she be able to keep herself safe?
Yeah.
Will she learn stranger danger, crossing the road? These are little wins. These are successes.
Yeah, I love that. Could you just, so I think you've already said where people can find you. So you're Downside Up on all social media, and that's with an S, 2 S's in the middle.
2 S's. Yeah, so there's a blog. I'm a dinosaur, so I'm not on TikTok.
I'm not on TikTok.
I'm on Twitter. I've got a blog. We have a Facebook page and we have an Instagram page, and they're all a little bit different, aren't they? Yeah. And we share different things on different places, but that's where you'll find me. And Hayley Newman doesn't throw up many things if you Google that. So my former name, which is where most of the blog stuff was, and the book is published in the name of Golonoska. So that's GOLENIOWSKA, and Natty's Natty Golonoska.
Brilliant.
So you can find us all out and about doing our thing.
Thank you ever so much for joining me, Hayley. You've been a wonderful guest. I've learned so much, and I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
Isn't Hayley lovely? Wasn't she great? Her honesty about her experiences and hopes for the future, I think, really shone through as well. So do make sure you check out her blog, which is Downside Up, and her book. And I'd watch that TEDx talk as well if you've got time, because I learned quite a lot from watching that. So it's on her website, or you can search it directly on YouTube. Thanks for listening to Send in the Experts with Georgina Durrant. Please subscribe to our channel if you're not already, and tell your friends and family about this podcast, and maybe some people on social media as well. Thanks. See you again soon.